team when I was the head varsity boys coach. We spent a lot of time together. He was always had a smile on his face, always loved sports, always brought a real spirit to the academy during his high school years. But he went on and he's done some remarkable things with his life, and that's why we've invited him here. So let me introduce him to you. As a youth, John learned to sail X-boats from his grandfather and mother, and then he moved to M16 scows and E-scows. He spent much of his childhood shuttling between doctors and hospitals after a tumor was discovered on his spine, but he still sailed. After a car accident, a wheelchair became his mode of transport, but he jumped right back into sailing. He discovered the 2.4 MR while flipping through a sailing magazine during his recuperation. The 2000 U.S. Paralympic team trials were his baptism into the 2.4 MRA single-handed class that also attracts able-bodied sailors. John had never single-handed before and was used to conferring with crew on tactics and having extra hands for trimming sails. At the 2008 Beijing Games, his first Paralympic Games, John won a bronze medal in the one-person keelboat. At the 2009 2.4 MR World Championships, he captured the gold medal, proving that he was the best in the world. Now Mr. Roof works as an attorney in Wisconsin, where he is a member of the Pewaukee Yacht Club and trains on Lake Michigan at the Milwaukee Community Sailing Center. Let's give John a big Brookfield Academy welcome.
All right. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. When I went to school here, this wasn't here. It was just a field, and everything was up the hill. So what I want to do to start things out is introduce you to a presentation that was given to us when we went to Colorado Springs, where we did all of the processing before we went over to Beijing. So I got a Mac, and this Dell is not really working the way my Mac does. Here we go.
Of the Amazon, the Nile, the Danube, the Rhine, the Yangtze, and the Mississippi in the palms of their right hands. A wild tiger nestles in each armpit, and a meadowlark perches on each shoulder. We, the world audience, stand, arms akimbo, longing for the passion of the animal and the melody of the lark. The tiger's passion attend the opening bell. The birds sing of the amazement which awaits. The miracle of joy that comes out of the gathering of our best, bringing their best, displaying the splendor of their bodies and the radiance of their agile minds to the cosmos. Encouragement to those other youth caught in the maws of poverty, crippled by the terror of ignorance. They say, brothers and sisters, yes, try, then try harder. Lunge forward. Press eagerly for release. The amazement which awaits is for you. We are here at the portal of the world we had wished for, at the lintel of the world we most need. We are here roaring and singing. We prove that we can not only make peace, we can bring it with us. With respect for the world and its people, we can compete passionately without hatred. With respect for the world and its people, we can take pride in the achievement of strangers. With respect for the world and its people, we can share openly in the success of friends. Here then is the amazement. Against the odds of impending war, in the mouth of bloody greed, human grace and human spirit can still conquer. We discover we ourselves are the amazement which awaits. We are ourselves amazement.
So that was sort of the start of a 2-day adventure that by the time you were done, all you wanted to do was make sure that you were on the podium and everyone that was with you did as well. So I'm going to, as I've been thinking about this presentation, and after Dr. Salzrud called me, I realized that I'd been thinking about it a lot. And, as much as I've thought about all these different things that have happened and, how profound and all that other stuff you could make this presentation, I decided to chuck all that and just go with a story. So my story starts with a broken leg, which Dr. Salzrud referred to. But what he didn't tell you is that happened to me 2 days after I got out of the hospital. I went in walking on crutches and came out in a wheelchair and was not really in the best of moods. And so what I typically did, what I did my whole life when I wanted to get in a better mood, is I went sailing. And Saturday afternoons at 2 o'clock, there's always an e-scow race on Pewaukee Lake. And I had an e-scow at that time. And we went out, sailed, I think, maybe we got 4th or 5th. And I knew that there was something wrong with my leg, but I wasn't really sure exactly what it was. And it turns out Danny Fredman was one of the guys that was sailing with me. He kind of torqued his back and it wasn't getting any better. So on Monday, we both agreed that we were going to go in and have it checked out. So we head off, I think it was Oconomowoc, and I get an x-ray. And the 2 x-ray technicians come out. They're looking at me like, what is this guy on? And I'm like, it's broken, right? And they said, no, we can't tell you that. The doctor's going to have to read it. And then they walked away and they came back and they're like, yeah, it's broken. So there was sometime end of July and I needed something to do while it was mending. And the first thing they wanted to do is rush me into the ER, and there were going to be plates and screws and all this other stuff. And I said, well, listen, I've lived with it for 2 days and it's not killing me, so I'm going to go talk to someone else. And I talked to my regular orthopedic surgeon, and he's like, John, we're going to put a cast on it, watch it closely. If it mends up, then it'll be done. And if not, we can think about a surgery. So I was reading all these back issues of Sailing World, and in it, I came across an article about the Paralympics, which at that point, I had never heard anything about them, right? I only followed the Olympics and I had no idea what the Paralympics were, let alone that there was a sailing event in it. Because for all the years I sailed a scow boat, I knew that I'd never have a chance to win a gold medal in a scow boat because it would never be an Olympic class. So I went down in 2000. It was the first time I ever sailed a 2.4 meter and got second. So I decided, as you know, the Olympics are 4-year cycles. So I decided to work hard and give it another shot. And in 204, I got second again. And no, in 204, I got third, sorry. And so I took a break for a while and went to back into the working world, which, as everyone's looking to what's going on. How many people are going on to college? And how many people know which one that's going to be? All right. So I knew by Thanksgiving of my senior year, I ended up going to Washington University. But at any rate, so fast forward, it's 2007, and I'm out in Newport, Rhode Island. It's in October. I'm absolutely freezing, and the whole week there was 3 days of racing, 1 day off, 3 days on. And the beginning of the regatta, things weren't looking so good. And I ended up winning the regatta on the last day, and was in the lead. And then I had a breakdown. One of the jib sheets didn't have a knot in it, so I had to tack off, get the knot in it, come back. Ended up winning the race, which meant that I won the trials, which meant that I got to go on and represent the U.S. in Beijing. Because in sailing, there's only one person per event. And so, you work, there's sort of this double peak when it comes to sailing and to any other Olympic event, because you have to train so hard to get to the trials, and then the winner goes on to the games. So, you have to be up here, and then you have to get back up there again. So as much as, you have this, yay, we won the trials, or I won the trials, now we really got to figure out how we're going to go on and win a medal. So that was October. The games weren't until September. And in May of 2008, I got a chance to go over to China for the first time and do a test event and sort of see what was going on. And that was a huge eye-opener in that, the venue that they had was gigantic. It was the biggest event location that I'd ever been in, and it was also the fanciest hotel that I'd ever stayed at. The plan was that it was going to be a 5-star hotel when the games were over, and it was like mega fancy. I mean, marble, glass. There were more counts on those sheets than I knew there were counts, and I mean, really, really something. And it was contrasted by the venue that they called Dream World up in Beijing, which was nothing more than a gigantic barracks. And the mattress was rubber, the pillowcases were non-existent. I mean, it's just this crummy place. And as we were going to the test event, the head coach of the U.S. Sailing said, John, we don't want you to go to the opening ceremonies. And I said, well, why not? And they're like, well, your event is really close to the opening ceremonies. In fact, your practice race is the day after the opening ceremonies, and then the regatta itself starts the following day. So you had 24 hours before your first race, and then 48 before the second. And the location, Qingdao, for the sailing was about an hour-and-a-half flight from Beijing. So you couldn't get there without taking a plane. So I was saying to him, well, maybe we need to think about that. And so I thought about it for about 30 seconds and said, well, sorry, I'm going. And they're like, well, we really don't want you to do that. And so we left it at that. And the rest of the months coming up to it, there were more people that were saying, you can't go, you can't go, you can't go, it's too close. And while I was at the test event, I find out that there are planes leaving almost every half hour. I mean, it's almost like a shuttle flight from New York to Boston. And, they start at 5 a.m. and the race didn't start until 1. And, I was like, well, let me tell you, that isn't a reason not to do it. And so again and again, my coach, Marco Dalbri from Finland, it was, when I had the discussion with him, I said, well, what do you think, Coach? And he said, I'm just going to support you 100%. If you want to go, we're going. If you don't want to go, we're not going to go. So having heard that, I went back to the head coach and I said, Betsy, I'm going to the opening ceremonies. And I left it at that, to which, there was quite a bit of pushback. And I'm convinced to this day that the reason I did so well at the Olympics is because I went to the opening ceremonies. And how many of you guys saw the Bird's Nest? All right, I mean, truly an amazing structure, right? There's 90,000 people in this stadium, and it took about 3 hours to marshal everyone, and you're in this gigantic waiting area that's between the Bird's Nest and the swimming cube. And you got to see everyone, every other country, and the number of costumes. I'm sure you've all seen it at the opening ceremony is pretty remarkable. But to actually get your picture with the flag bearer and see all these costumes up close, it's pretty amazing. And they give you all the water you can possibly drink, and there was a bag lunch, and so you never had to worry about anything. And then it finally came time to go into the opening to the Bird's Nest. And so the whole U.S. team is there, and 95% of those people I had never met, because we were one of the only remote venues at the games. I think the only other one was equestrian. I think that was done over in Hong Kong. But at any rate, everyone's marshaled together, and you start going down the tunnel. And as you're in the tunnel, the chant of these 90,000 people starts out, USA, USA. And by the time you're out onto the field, the whole place is just, alive with 90,000 people saying USA over and over. And you go around and you get into your area, and then the flame or the torch comes in. And because we had practiced long enough in the venue down in Qingdao, we actually saw the torch come on to mainland China, and they had a presentation, and then it went up to Beijing. And so it goes around the stadium a couple times, and the final trade-off was to the most decorated Chinese Paralympic athlete. I think he had 7 or 8 gold medals and a fistful of silver and bronze, and he was in track and field, or I think the proper term is athletics. So he's this big guy. He's missing half of one leg, and he's in a wheelchair. And you're like, well, that really isn't making any sense until they drop he gets the torch, he lights his, and he puts it in this holder that's in the wheelchair. And the platform that he's on is maybe 10 meters off the ground, and there's a giant rope that's hanging from the top of the stadium. And all of a sudden he grabs it, and he starts going up. And, it's like, whoa, that is a long way. I mean, it had to have been at least 100 meters from where he was to where the flame was. And this crowd is just, on fire. I mean, it was the loudest crowd I'd ever been at. And about a third of the way up, he stopped, and the place went absolutely silent. I mean, you couldn't hear, you could hear yourself breathing. It was literally that quiet. And it was maybe 10, 15 seconds before he caught his breath and started it off again. And as he's getting closer and closer to the top, the crowd is just going crazy. And when the flame, went kind of around that spiral and then lit, the place was just, I've never heard a crowd that loud in my life. And so, I'm like, it's definitely one of those goosebump moments for sure. Of the 2 that I had at the games, the first was at the opening ceremonies, and the second was on the podium. So the day is over, and it's now midnight, and we go back to Dream World. And Dream World, the dining hall was this tent that was probably twice as big as this room. and it was across the street, and we were definitely hungry. So we go in there. We'd been told it was open 24 hours a day, and there's cuisine from all over the world, and here's the team from Azerbaijan, and there's the guys from Egypt, and over here are the guys from Russia, and I mean, there's just teams everywhere. The place was pretty full, but for whatever reason, it was super packed at one end of the hall. So, whenever you're in a foreign country, at least this is the way we look at it, if you're going to go out to dinner, you might as well go to where the most people are, because usually means that the food's pretty good. So we go, we said to each other, this is my coach, Marco, and I, let's head down there. So we head down to the end, and it turns out that the reason everyone is down there is that there's a McDonald's. And I didn't know that. I knew that they were a sponsor, but nothing beyond that. So, the guy in front of us, we followed this team from Azerbaijan. The guy orders, 7 Big Macs, 12 quarter pounders with cheese, and like 2 dozen French fries. And I'm thinking to myself, those guys must get a lot of money in Azerbaijan, because that's going to be, pretty expensive, right? And there's a cash register there, and, they're totaling it all up. And we were talking, and, I'm sure he brought it back for the rest of his teammates. So it comes to our turn, and we order up, and they go through the same thing. And then at the end, they hit a button, and the total goes from however many yuan to 0. So McDonald's was free for the whole time that you were there. And it was, I'm sure, the most popular place, both in the Olympics and the Paralympics, because my friend Anna Tunnicliffe won the gold in the women's single-handed laser. And they were there for the closing ceremonies and said the same thing, that the whole world was at McDonald's. And unfortunately, there wasn't any McDonald's in the venue that we had, but it was a pretty good kitchen. And they did a nice job. I mean, you had a buffet every day, and there ended up being, twice. We got there for the closing ceremonies and the opening ceremonies, so I think I ate at McDonald's twice. But at any rate, we went. Now the opening ceremonies are over, and it's time to get serious, because there's 5 days of racing when you're in the sailing event. And it was, you had everything from, there was 17 countries that were sailing. And, during the course of a regatta, the positions change quite a bit. And depending on how you're doing, they make you put additional stickers on your sails. And as it was, you had to carry your country flag, you had to carry a logo of the games, and then you had to have your name. And in China, there are 2 people for every job. And so there were a couple of people on the United States flag. There were 2 people for my name. Fortunately, there's only 3 letters in it. But then they had 2 people for the U, 2 people for the S, and 2 people for the A. And then there's the big sticker on the side of the boat. So every morning, if you were in the top 3 of the regatta, you had to put an additional sticker on your sail. So I got to run with the yellow meant you were in first place, blue meant you were in second place, and red meant that you were in third place. So as it turns out, I got every color on my sail, and then on the last day, I just got beat by the Frenchman, which turned my silver into a bronze. But as the week went on, we were continually getting different things told to us by both the interpreter and the organizing committee, as well as our team coach. And one of them that we kept on getting was to make sure that you had your right uniform on. And as it turned out, there was someone before you got into the sailing venue that was basically the uniform police. And I got busted a couple times, because if you weren't wearing your team uniform, you had to have one of the sponsors, you had to be a sponsored shirt. So in this case, still don't quite know how the licensing worked on this, But the major sponsor for the games was Adidas, and yet the sponsor for the U.S. was Nike and Polo. So they busted me twice for not having an Adidas shirt on when I should have been either wearing the Nike or the Adidas. So they made you go back up to your room, change, and then get back to the venue or to your sailboat. And after every regatta or every race, there were usually 2 races every day, you'd come back in, and before you got to go back up to the to your room to take a shower, because believe me, the water there was pretty awful. And I had this wound on my ankle that I'd been struggling with for 10 years at that point, and the team doctor was super hyper about making sure that none of the water from the Yellow Sea got into my ankle. So right after I got done, I always had to go and get it cleaned out and checked out. But as I was saying, you always got interviewed by at least 4 different newspaper sources before you left, if you were in the top 3. And on the last day, the interview took that much longer because there were that many more people. And, I've never, usually when I'm sailing, if there's one reporter, that's a lot, right? And here there were, you couldn't move without being, interviewed or a picture being taken of you. So it got, they told us what time the medal ceremony was going to be, and it was getting closer and closer to that time. And finally, the coach was like, John, you got to get up there and change. So here's my last story, I promise. We head back up to the room, and in Colorado Springs, they gave you all of your uniforms. And, I was a little superstitious, so when it came time to put on the medal ceremony outfit or uniform, I quick made sure it fit, but then I took it off and, jammed it in a suitcase and was not going to see it until hopefully I needed to. And lo and behold, I needed it, and I couldn't find the tracksuit, the pants for it. And I, was rifling through my room, the other room that I was in. I mean, I looked everywhere, and I couldn't find these pants. So I came up with another pair that were also blue, but I knew weren't the right ones. So I rushed down to the medal ceremony, and there's a team leader as well as a head coach and your coach. And the team leader says to me, John, you have the wrong pants on. That's like, I know I have the wrong pants on, Sarah, and I would be happy to change those pants if you had a pair that fit. But this is all I could find, and, tell me what to do. And she's like, well, you don't have the right uniform on. And, I was kind of looking at her like, well, you want me to go in there in my underwear? And finally she's like, well, okay, because they're blue, I'll let you in. I was like, oh, thanks. That's just great of you. And I got I got to go in, and we were the first class to get to the platform. And it's amazing when they start. You see the 3 flagpoles, and you see your flag going up, and it was a special moment because it was the first time either both my sister and my mother had ever seen me sail, and maybe the second time my father saw me sail at 2.4. So it was great that they were there in the audience, and I got to share that with them. And I know that today is a day where we're talking about courage and commitment, and clearly, if you want to go for an Olympic medal, there is quite a bit of commitment that takes place. But the courage that goes with it is something. And I was always inspired by one of my teammates, Nick Scandone, who ended up winning a gold medal. He was in the 2-person event, and he had ALS, or Lou Gehrig's disease, and in December of 2008. So we were back by the end of September, October, November, and then in December he passed away. So I ended up going obviously to his funeral, but I thought of the courage that it took for him to do that, and what a shame it was that he only got to enjoy that medal for only a few months. But you know, that always makes me think about the things that we want to do and the things that we need to do. And you know, and when I think of those kind of goals, I would encourage you all to find the one that you think is the most rewarding and go after that goal. So thanks for your time.
Okay.
The question was, where was my boat built? And the answer is it was built in Finland. And I should tell you, it's not a big boat, right? It's only 13 feet, 8 inches. And it's the wettest boat I've ever sailed in my life. I tell everyone it's like being in the bathtub with the shower on. Is there another? That went into, the question was, how did the boat get over there? And they go in a shipping container. And so we ended up taking 2 boats over. One went over for the May event, and then another one went over for the Olympic event, or the Paralympics. And the interesting thing was that it took maybe a month for it to get over there. On the way there, right? But the container that my boat was in was also the container that the gold medal boat was in, and it took over 4 months to get it back. So we all thought that the Chinese were pretty, they were absolutely unabashed about coming up and taking, pictures and stuffing their head in the boat and seeing what was going on. So we were pretty sure they were taking apart our boat and seeing everything that was in it. Yeah, absolutely. I had the chance of helping out the MAC, I think it's the MAC Fund, right? Everyone who won a medal in the '08 games was asked to come to the Bradley Center for a Bucks game. And I got to have dinner with a woman that, has 2 gold medals and a silver medal. And she said, without a doubt, that the Chinese medal was the best of all of them. And she was right. I mean, it's the only medal that has a precious stone with it. And in that case, it's jade. They were all made with jade. And it took them over 2 years to get enough jade of the quality that they were happy with. So it's going to be available. I would encourage all of you to come up and take a look at it, because it's a heck of a medal. And it's the same one that you get at the Olympics. The only difference being that there's Braille on the back of the Paralympic medal.
Any other questions? The fastest you've ever sailed?
Yeah, well, in a 2.4, that would be a whopping 4 knots. The hull speed on a 2.4 is 4 knots, because it's got lead. It's got 400 pounds of lead in the keel. So maybe if you're going down a wave, one of the YouTube videos I had was myself and Paul Tingley, the Canadian, training, and we probably were going over 10 knots because there were huge waves to surf in clear water. But in terms of sailing, I've probably been 25 knots. So that's about 32 miles an hour until you get to the ice. And I've done some ice boating too, and when you're on the ice, you're, going around 60 miles an hour.
Any other questions? Cam?
I first started sailing when I was 9 years old, and I just turned 44, so it's been a while. The question was how supportive was my family, and the answer was very. I mean, for a while there, I think they all thought I was a little nuts, but they were from a very early age supportive. And then when I got going on the Paralympics, they were sometimes they were commenting on how stubborn I was, but very supportive. And like I said, it was amazing to be there with my family when on the podium. So.
Other questions right there?
Sorry?
What was that reading? What did you order at McDonald's?
Oh, I got my usual cheeseburger, only ketchup and French fries. And I can tell you, that cheeseburger tasted an awful lot like the one you get in Brookfield. It was amazing. And to that end, when you go through the processing, they give you all the do's and don'ts. So one of they give you this big long deal about how you can offend someone with chopsticks. And I had no idea that there were that many ways to offend a person with chopsticks. But they don't give you chopsticks with your cheeseburger and French fries. But one of the other things that they said is, if you're not in the venue, they told you that they would prefer if you ate at a McDonald's or a Burger King or a Kentucky Fried Chicken. And we all were kind of looking at each other, and it's, I can't tell you how many nutrition lectures I've sat through where, lean, healthy protein and yada, yada, yada. And so, I'm like, wow, why would you guys be, and then everyone's looking at each other and we're thinking, well, it's probably because they're worried about, our stomach, and there's a lot of strange things over in China. And well, turns out they could care less about what your stomach was doing or was not doing. That the reason they wanted you to, always eat in the venue, and if not, go to a McDonald's, was that they were afraid you were going to test positive in a drug test, because they use all different kinds of steroids in their agriculture. So we did what they said.
Any other questions? Yes, Gigi.
How is sailing in a wheelchair different than regular sailing? Well, sailing without a wheelchair. I don't use my wheelchair when I'm sailing. It stays on the dock. But in terms of mobility, the boat that I sail in, I have this special seat that the Newman Haas racing team made for me, and I stay in that seat the whole time. We designed it so that it moves from side to side, but there isn't as much motion. So it's not like I'm going from one, deck to the next. I stay in the middle.
Any other questions?
The races at the World Championship, they tend to be an hour to an hour and a half, but at the games, they only wanted them to be 45 to 55 minutes. And the principal race officer was from New Zealand, and that guy, he did an amazing job. I mean, every race was the longest race we sailed was 55 minutes, which is I mean, it's long if you're watching it, but it's not so long if you're racing it.
Okay, let's give John a round of applause. Thanks for coming today.
Want me to say? There's just a brief 10-minute break, so we'd prefer you stay in the gym, just stretch and talk. There'll be a 30-minute break after our next speaker, so if you just stay here, be good.